Let me tell you something that most people in this world will never understand. Most people have it completely backwards. They spend money they don't have, to impress people they don't like, to buy things they don't need, and they call that living. They think that looking rich is the same as being rich. They think that the appearance of wealth is the same as the reality of wealth. And that single confusion, that one profound misunderstanding, keeps generation after generation locked in a cycle of debt, desperation, and diminishing returns. But the truly successful, the men and women who build lasting fortunes, who create generational legacies, who construct lives of genuine freedom, they operate from a completely different philosophy. They act broke when they have money so they can think rich when everyone else is broke. They practice restraint as a discipline. They practice sacrifice as a strategy, and the results over time are nothing short of extraordinary. Now, I want you to hear me carefully here, because what I'm about to share with you is not the popular message. The popular message is to treat yourself. The popular message is that you deserve it. And maybe you do deserve it, but the question I want to ask you today is not whether you deserve it. The question is whether you can afford it. And I don't mean afford it in the small sense, where you check your bank account and see a positive number. I mean afford it in the grand sense. Can you afford the long-term cost of short-term pleasure? Can you afford the price that your future self will pay so that your present self can feel comfortable? Because every dollar you spend today that isn't invested, isn't working, isn't positioned to grow, that dollar has a price, and the price is everything it could have become. Think about that. Every dollar is a seed. And when you spend a seed, you don't just lose the seed, you lose the tree, you lose the fruit, you lose the harvest that could have fed your family for a lifetime. Most people walk through life eating their seeds and wondering why they never have a garden. And when the winter comes, because winter always comes, they stand in an empty field, confused, cold, and asking why nobody told them. I'm telling you now. The philosophy of acting broke when you are not broke begins with a decision. It begins with a moment of clarity where you look at your situation honestly and say, I have more capacity than my current habits reflect. Because that's the truth about most people. The problem is rarely income. The problem is almost never that the money isn't coming in. The problem is the philosophy that governs what happens to the money once it arrives. You can earn a fortune and end up with nothing. History is full of those stories. Lottery winners who were broke within 5 years. Athletes earning millions who retired with debt. Entertainers who made more in 1 year than most families see in a lifetime, and yet died without a dollar to their name. The money came. The philosophy was missing. And without the philosophy, the money just passes through you like water through a broken vessel. So the first thing I want to establish with you is this. Wealth is not an event. Wealth is a practice. Wealth is a daily discipline applied with consistency over an extended period of time. And the practice begins with controlling what you do with what you have, regardless of how much or how little that is. Because here is a truth that the wealthy understand and the poor too often ignore. The habit you practice when you have a little is the same habit you will practice when you have a lot. If you cannot control $50, do not expect to control 50,000. If you cannot govern a small paycheck, a large one will not save you. The behavior scales, the philosophy scales. Whatever you are doing right now with money is what you will do with more money, unless you deliberately and intentionally change the underlying philosophy. And that's what today is about, changing the philosophy. Now let's talk about what it actually means to act broke, because some people hear that phrase and they think I'm suggesting poverty. I'm not suggesting poverty. I'm not suggesting deprivation. I'm not suggesting that you live in misery and deny yourself every pleasure. That is not the message. The message is far more sophisticated than that and far more powerful. Acting broke is a posture. It is a stance you take toward money, toward spending, toward the acquisition of things. It is the discipline of asking every single time money is about to leave your hands, whether this expenditure serves your future or merely satisfies your present. That's it. That's the whole thing. One question, applied consistently, will transform your financial life. Is this serving my future, or is it merely satisfying my present? The wealthy ask that question. They ask it about large purchases and small ones. They ask it about habits and subscriptions and dining choices and vehicles and vacations. They run everything through that filter. And over time, the cumulative effect of consistently choosing future over present, of deferring gratification strategically, of investing instead of consuming, the cumulative effect is a kind of financial freedom that most people in this country will never experience. Now here's what I find fascinating. The people who appear the wealthiest are very often the least wealthy. The man driving the most expensive car may be the one with the thinnest wallet. The family living in the largest home may be the one with the most crushing debt load, because our society has taught people to perform prosperity rather than build it. We've been trained by advertising, by social pressure, by comparison, to demonstrate wealth through consumption, to signal status through spending. And the trap is that the signal costs money, real money, money that could have been working, and all it produces in return is the perception of success. Not success itself, just the perception of it. And what is the perception of success worth? Ask the man who spent 20 years performing prosperity and never built anything real. Ask him at 60 what the performance was worth. Ask him when the income stops and there is no pile of assets, no investments returning dividends, no properties generating income, no savings providing security. Ask him then what all those signals were worth. He will tell you, and his answer will contain every regret that decades of misplaced priorities can produce. The truly successful person understands something different. The truly successful person understands that real wealth is invisible. Real wealth doesn't drive past you in a flashy vehicle. Real wealth doesn't wear itself around someone's wrist or hang it in their driveway. Real wealth sits quietly in accounts and assets and businesses and investments, compounding silently, growing patiently, building the kind of security and freedom that no luxury purchase can ever provide. Real wealth doesn't need to be seen. Real wealth is felt in the absence of financial anxiety, in the freedom to make choices without monetary constraint, in the ability to say yes when you want to and no when you want to, not because money forces your hand, but because your values guide your decisions. That is what we are building today, not the performance of prosperity. The reality of it. Let me give you a picture of two young people. They start at the same place. Same age, same income, same opportunities. The first young person looks at what he earns and makes a series of decisions designed to express his income. He gets the apartment that stretches his budget. He gets the car that impresses his friends. He goes to the restaurants where the prices signal sophistication. He wears the brands that communicate his aspirations. And every month, most of what comes in goes right back out, slightly faster than it arrived. He tells himself he'll start saving when he earns more. He tells himself that this is just a season, that soon things will shift and he'll get control. But the habits are forming, the patterns are setting, and the future self of that young man inherits not wealth but debt, not assets but liabilities, not freedom but obligation. The second young person makes a different decision. She looks at what she earns and she makes a different set of choices. She lives in the apartment that costs less than she can afford. She drives the car that serves her transportation needs rather than her ego. She cooks more meals than she orders. She finds entertainment that doesn't require constant spending. And every month, before she pays anything else, she pays herself. She invests. She builds. She plants seeds with patience and intention. She is not living a lesser life. She is not suffering. She is not deprived, but she is operating from a philosophy that the first young person doesn't yet understand. And 10 years later, 20 years later, those two people who started at the same place will be living in completely different realities. Not because their incomes were different, because their philosophies were different. That's the power of the philosophy. That's why it matters so much. That's why I want to spend time here going deep on this, because this is not about budgeting tricks or investment tactics. Those things matter, but they are downstream of philosophy. Get the philosophy right and the tactics will follow naturally. Get the philosophy wrong and no tactic will save you. So let's build the philosophy. Let's build it piece by piece, layer by layer, until it is solid enough to stand on. The first layer of the philosophy is this. You must develop a genuine, deep, considered relationship with the concept of future self. Most people live for present self almost exclusively. Present self wants comfort. Present self wants convenience. Present self wants entertainment and validation and relief from boredom. And present self is very loud. Present self is right here, making demands, feeling feelings, wanting things. Future self is quiet. Future self is distant. Future self seems abstract, a version of you that doesn't quite feel real yet. And so present self wins almost every financial battle because present self shows up and future self doesn't. But the wealthy have learned to bring future self into the room. They have learned to make future self real, vivid, and present in every financial decision. When they are about to make a purchase, they don't just feel the pull of present self wanting the thing. They also hear future self clearly, specifically, telling them what that decision will mean 10 years from now, 20 years from now, at retirement, at the point when income stops and assets either exist or they don't. They have cultivated a relationship with future self that is so vivid, so real, so emotionally compelling that it can actually compete with present self in the moment of decision. And the way you develop that relationship is through contemplation, through sitting quietly with the question of who you are becoming, through asking yourself regularly, daily if possible, what your financial life will look like in 10 years if you continue on your current trajectory. Not what you hope it will look like, not what you intend for it to look like, what it will actually look like if you keep making the choices you're currently making. If nothing changes, if the habits you have right now are the habits you carry forward, where does that road end? Be honest, be specific, be unflinchingly accurate, and then ask whether that destination is acceptable to you. If it is not, and for most people who take that exercise seriously, it is not, then something must change. And the something that must change is the philosophy. Once the philosophy shifts, behavior follows. It doesn't happen overnight. Habits are deeply grooved, and culture is a powerful current to swim against. But with a clear philosophy, honestly held and regularly reinforced, the behavior will shift. And once the behavior shifts consistently, the outcomes begin to transform. Slowly at first, almost invisibly, like a seed in the ground, nothing to see on the surface but tremendous activity happening beneath it. And then suddenly, it seems to the outside world the results appear. Suddenly there is security, suddenly there is a cushion, suddenly there are assets and options and freedom, and the people who watch that person's quiet, unglamorous decade of discipline will call it luck. They will say the person got a break, they will attribute the result to circumstances, to connections, to fortune, and the person who built it will smile quietly because they know exactly what it was. It was the philosophy practiced daily, compounded over years, yielding exactly what it was always destined to yield. Now let me talk about the second layer of the philosophy, which is this. You must understand the difference between cost and price. Most people know cost. Cost is what you pay at the register. Cost is the number on the price tag. Cost is the monthly payment, the annual fee, the upfront expense. Cost is visible and immediate. Price, as I mean it, is different. Price is the true total expense of any decision, calculated over the entire duration of its consequences. Price includes opportunity cost. Price includes what you give up by making one choice versus another. Price includes the future value of money deployed in one direction versus another. And almost nobody calculates price. Almost everybody only calculates cost. Let me illustrate this for you. A cup of coffee every morning, the cost is $4, maybe $5. Seems small, seems irrelevant in the grand scheme of a financial life. But what is the price? What is the true price of that daily decision, calculated over 20 years, invested at a modest return? That $4 a day becomes more than $50,000. That one seemingly trivial daily choice, maintained without examination over 2 decades, carries a price of $50,000. Not as a punishment, not as a critique of coffee, but as a mathematical reality that almost nobody stops to calculate because they are only looking at cost, never at price. Now multiply that across every unconsidered daily expenditure. The subscriptions that renew automatically and are never evaluated. The convenience spending that accumulates without intention. The social spending that happens because everyone else is spending and the pressure to participate is real. The upgrade that seemed reasonable in the moment, the replacement for something that could have been repaired, all of it adding up, all of it carrying a price that dwarfs its cost, all of it spending your future while you experience your present. When you begin calculating price instead of cost, your relationship with spending changes permanently because suddenly nothing is cheap, and suddenly the things that carry the highest price are often the smallest, most ordinary daily choices that you never thought to examine. This does not mean paralysis. This does not mean that every expenditure becomes a crisis of analysis. It means developing an instinct, a felt sense, for the difference between spending that serves you and spending that merely passes through you. And that instinct is built through practice, through the habit of asking the right questions, through enough experience watching the consequences of considered and unconsidered financial choices play out over time. The instinct comes. But first comes the philosophy, and with the philosophy comes the practice, and with the practice comes the instinct, and with the instinct comes a kind of financial grace, the ability to move through a world of constant spending pressure with clarity and intention, neither deprived nor depleted, but building, always building. Let me give you the third layer now, and this one is perhaps the most important of all. You must understand what money actually is, because most people have a relationship with money that is based on misunderstanding, and the misunderstanding is costing them everything. Most people believe money is for spending. They believe that income is the goal, and spending is the reward for earning it. They work so that they can buy things. They trade their time, their energy, their health, their most vital years. They trade all of that in exchange for money, and then they immediately exchange the money for things that either depreciate or disappear entirely. The cycle is work, earn, spend, repeat. And at the end of that cycle, what do you have? At the end of 40 years of that cycle, what is the result? You have worked your entire life and you have funded your lifestyle. Nothing more. The 40 years are gone. The money is gone. And if you are lucky, you have Social Security. If you are lucky, that is not a plan. That is an accident waiting to fully unfold. The wealthy understand money differently. They understand that money is not primarily for spending. Money is for deploying. Money is a tool. Money is a resource that, when deployed intelligently, produces more money without requiring your additional time or labor. And that secondary money, the money that your money earns, can also be deployed to produce tertiary money and so on, compounding into amounts that the original saver would find difficult to comprehend. Money, deployed wisely, becomes an army. And the wealthy are building armies. Every dollar they save and invest is another soldier in an army that fights for their financial freedom 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether they are awake or asleep, working or vacationing, healthy or sick. The person who spends every dollar they earn has no army. They have nothing fighting for them. They are fighting alone, and a single person fighting alone will always be exhausted. That is why financial exhaustion is so common. That constant anxiety about money, that paycheck to paycheck tension, that sense that you are always working harder just to stay in the same place. It is because you are fighting alone. Your money is not working, only you are working. And you have a finite amount of working capacity, constrained by hours and health and years. But money, deployed correctly, has no such constraint. Money can work forever. Money can work for your children and your children's children. Money has the capacity to build a legacy that outlasts your lifetime if you understand its nature and treat it accordingly. So the shift I'm asking you to make is a fundamental one. Start seeing every dollar not as purchasing power, but as deployment power. Start asking not what this dollar can buy you today, but what this dollar can build for you over time. And the moment you begin seeing money that way, truly seeing it that way, not as a concept, but as a living, felt reality, the moment that shift happens, you will never spend money the same way again, because you will see what you are actually giving up each time you spend unnecessarily. You will see the army soldier you are surrendering. And surrendering soldiers becomes a very different decision once you can see what you are surrendering. Now I want to address something here because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Jim, this sounds like a life of sacrifice. This sounds like a life of doing without, of deprivation, of delayed pleasure that never actually arrives. What's the point of building wealth if you can't enjoy the journey? And that is a fair and important question, and I want to answer it honestly. The discipline I am describing is not a life of suffering. It is not a life of watching others enjoy things while you sit in self-imposed poverty, clutching your investments like a miser in a cold room. That is not the philosophy. The philosophy is about proportion and intentionality. It is about choosing which pleasures to pursue and which to forgo, based on your values and your vision rather than impulse and social pressure. It is the difference between intentional spending and reactive spending. Intentional spending produces pleasure and satisfaction and no regret. Reactive spending, the impulse purchase, the keeping up with comparison expenditure, the emotional buy. Reactive spending produces a brief hit of dopamine followed by a long tail of financial consequence. You can spend money, you can enjoy money, you can take trips and eat beautiful meals and dress well and live in a comfortable home, but do it intentionally. Do it as part of a deliberate plan that also includes saving and investing at a rate that puts your financial future on solid ground. Do it after you have paid your future self first, because the most important bill you pay every month is not your mortgage or your car payment or your utilities. The most important bill you pay is the one you pay to your own future. Before any other obligation is addressed, something must go to building your freedom. And what remains after that investment is yours to deploy on the pleasures of today. But reverse the order and spend first, save whatever is left, and there is never anything left. The arithmetic of that approach always produces the same result. Nothing saved, nothing invested, nothing building, nothing compounding, and a future that looks exactly like a more expensive version of today. Pay yourself first. It is simple, it is ancient, it has been the cornerstone of financial wisdom for centuries. And it works. It works every time. But it requires a decision and a commitment that most people are never willing to make because it requires telling present self that future self is going to be addressed before present self gets everything it wants. And present self does not enjoy hearing that. This is where character becomes relevant to wealth, because the ability to defer gratification, to sacrifice present comfort for future security, to maintain discipline in an environment of constant temptation, that is a character exercise before it is a financial one. The person with strong character and poor financial knowledge will out-earn the person with poor character and sophisticated financial knowledge in the long run, because character is the foundation on which every financial strategy rests. Without it, the strategy collapses. With it, even a simple strategy executed consistently over decades produces remarkable results. So when I say act broke, what I'm really saying is practice the character traits that are consistent with building wealth. Practice delayed gratification, practice impulse control, practice the discipline of choosing long-term over short-term, future over present, building over consuming. Those are character practices, and they are available to every person in this room regardless of their current income, regardless of their past mistakes, regardless of how long they've been operating under a different philosophy. Character can be developed, philosophy can be changed, and the moment the philosophy changes, the trajectory changes. Not the destination, not yet, but the trajectory. And a changed trajectory, maintained over enough time, leads to a completely different destination. Let me talk now about the mindset of thinking rich, because that is the second half of this philosophy, and it is equally important. Acting broke without thinking rich produces nothing but misery. You become a person who denies themselves without any compelling vision of what the denial is building toward. That person usually quits, because sacrifice without purpose is just suffering, and suffering without purpose is unbearable. But sacrifice with a clear, vivid, emotionally compelling purpose is something entirely different. It is almost energizing. It is the sacrifice of the athlete in training who endures the early mornings and the aching muscles because the vision of championship is real and bright and motivating. It is the sacrifice of the entrepreneur who works evenings and weekends because the vision of what they are building is so vivid that the sacrifice feels like investment rather than loss. You must have the vision. You must have the clear, specific, emotionally charged picture of what you are building and why it matters and what your life will look like when you get there. Thinking rich means thinking at the scale of the life you are building rather than the scale of the moment you are living. It means when you sit down to review your finances, you are not just looking at this month's numbers. You are looking at this decade's trajectory. You are asking whether the behaviors of this week compound into the outcomes of that decade. Thinking rich means holding a vision of your financial life that is large enough and bright enough to pull you through the moments of temptation, the moments of comparison, the moments when acting broke feels hard because the world around you is acting otherwise. Thinking rich also means educating yourself relentlessly about how money works. Because the truth is, most people are financially illiterate. Not because they are unintelligent, not because the information is inaccessible, but because school did not teach it, and family very often did not model it, and culture certainly does not reinforce it. Most people were never given the map. They were set loose in a complex financial landscape with no navigation tools, and they did the best they could, and which usually means they followed what they saw modeled, which usually means spending and debt and anxiety and never quite getting ahead. But the map exists. The knowledge exists. The principles of building wealth, saving, investing, compounding, diversifying, controlling liability, building assets, these principles are known, they are documented, they are accessible, and the wealthy avail themselves of that knowledge relentlessly. They read, they study, they seek out mentors and teachers and books and courses that deepen their understanding of how money moves, how wealth is built, how assets work, how markets behave. They treat financial education as a lifelong discipline, not a one-time event. Because the landscape changes and the tools evolve, and the person who stops learning falls behind the person who never stops. If you want to think rich, you must feed your mind with rich thinking. You must be intentional about what you consume mentally, because what you consume mentally becomes the framework through which you interpret reality, make decisions, and take action. If you consume a steady diet of financial victimhood, messages that tell you the system is rigged, that the deck is stacked, that wealth is only for those born into it, you will develop a framework of helplessness that makes action feel futile and sacrifice feel pointless, and nothing will change. But if you consume a steady diet of financial possibility, stories of people who started with nothing and built something, principles that demonstrate exactly how wealth is constructed brick by brick, knowledge that demystifies the process, you will develop a framework of agency. And agency is the foundation of everything. The wealthy are not passive. The wealthy do not wait for circumstances to improve before they begin. The wealthy do not say, once my income increases, I will start saving. They say, I will save now with what I have, and the practice I build now will serve me at every income level I ever reach. They begin before they are ready. They act before conditions are perfect. They plant seeds in imperfect soil because they understand that imperfect soil with seeds in it always outperforms perfect soil that was never planted. The waiting, the perpetual preparation for the moment when it feels right to begin. The waiting is the enemy, and I have seen more people destroyed by waiting than by any other financial mistake. Begin now. Begin with what you have. Begin with 10% of whatever you earn if that's what you can commit to. Begin with 5%. Begin with whatever your honest assessment tells you is sustainable. But begin, because the day you begin is the day your future self starts to exist as something more than a vague aspiration. The day you begin is the day the compounding begins, and compounding is the most powerful force in personal finance. Not the flashiest, not the most exciting, not the one that makes headlines or produces dramatic stories, but the most powerful, the most reliable, the most certain to produce extraordinary results when applied with consistency over sufficient time. Let me describe the architecture of a wealthy life, because I want you to see not just the philosophy, but the practical shape of what it produces when applied over decades. A wealthy life is not a life of excess. It is not a life of having everything and wanting nothing more. The architecture of a wealthy life is this: below your income, you live. Within your discipline, you invest. Across your investments, you diversify. Through your assets, you generate income that does not require your labor. And from that position, the position of genuine financial independence, you make choices based on desire and values rather than necessity and fear. That is the destination. That is what acting broke and thinking rich, practiced with consistency over years, actually produces. Not the performance of wealth, the reality of it, the freedom of it, the security of it, the ability to be genuinely generous, not with show, but with substance, the ability to provide for the people you love without the grinding anxiety that financial fragility always produces, the ability to pursue the work that means something to you rather than simply the work that pays the most, the ability eventually to say that money is no longer the primary constraint on your decisions. Not because you have unlimited wealth, but because you have sufficient wealth, enough that the basics are secured, the future is funded, and the present can be enjoyed without the shadow of financial fear. That is worth the sacrifice. That is worth the discipline. That is worth every evening spent studying instead of spending, every purchase reconsidered, every temptation acknowledged and declined in service of the larger vision. That is worth everything it costs. And here's what I want you to understand about the cost. The cost decreases over time. That is the nature of discipline and habit. At first, it is hard. At first, acting broke when you have money feels unnatural, feels restrictive, feels like swimming upstream against the powerful current of culture and comparison and present desire. But habits form, practices become instincts, and what once required enormous willpower to maintain begins to require very little because it has become simply the way you operate. The person who has maintained financial discipline for 10 years does not struggle with it the way they did in year one. The philosophy has become the person, the practice has become the character, and the character produces the results as naturally as an apple tree produces apples, not by straining but simply by being what it is. You become what you practice. This is not a metaphor. This is not an inspirational flourish. This is a literal description of how human beings are shaped. We become what we repeatedly do. The person who repeatedly saves becomes a saver. The person who repeatedly invests becomes an investor. The person who repeatedly defers gratification for larger rewards becomes someone for whom deferred gratification is natural and comfortable and satisfying in itself. The transformation is real, and it is available to every person willing to engage the practice long enough for it to become identity. Identity is the deepest level of this work. When someone says, I am a saver, that is different from saying, I am trying to save. When someone says, I am an investor, that is different from saying, I have some investments. The identity claim shapes behavior at a level that goals and intentions cannot reach. Because identity is always on. You behave consistently with who you believe you are without thinking about it, without effort, without struggle. So the deepest version of this philosophy is not just about changing your behaviors. It is about changing your identity, becoming the person for whom financial discipline is simply an expression of character, as natural as any other core trait. How do you change identity? Through evidence, through accumulating proof, through your own consistent behavior that you are the person you claim to be. Every time you save rather than spend, you cast a vote for the identity of a person who saves. Every time you invest rather than consume, you reinforce the identity of a person who builds wealth. Every time you choose long-term over short-term, you deepen the neural pathways that make that choice easier and more automatic the next time. Identity is built from the inside out, through behavior, through evidence, through the cumulative weight of consistent choices over time. Now let me speak to the social dimension of this philosophy because it is real and it deserves honest treatment. Living below your means in a culture that equates spending with success is not socially neutral. There will be pressure, there will be comparisons, there will be people in your life, friends, family, colleagues, who are performing prosperity and who consciously or unconsciously will make you feel the gap between their performance and your discipline. There will be moments at dinner tables and in conversations and on social media where the world seems to be shouting one message: spend, display, consume, signal, and your quiet philosophy of building seems almost antisocial by comparison. Stay the course. Do not trade your future for their approval. The people whose approval you are trading for are often the same people who will, a decade from now, be struggling financially while you have arrived at freedom. And the strange irony is that the approval of people who are making poor financial choices is worth the least because it is purchased at the highest price. Their approval costs you your future. It is the most expensive approval available. Decline it, politely, warmly, without judgment of them or their choices, but firmly, consistently, without compromise. This does not mean becoming miserly or antisocial or joyless in the name of financial discipline. It means finding ways to connect and participate and enjoy life that are consistent with your values and your trajectory. It means being secure enough in your philosophy that the behavior of others does not derail you. It means having your vision so clearly in mind that the social pressure of the present does not outweigh the compelling pull of the future you are building. And over time, as your discipline produces visible results, as the freedom becomes apparent, as the security becomes tangible, the same people who once pressured you will begin to ask you for advice. Because results are the ultimate argument. No philosophy survives contact with results that contradict it. Let me take you deeper into the thinking rich component because I want to make sure you understand that this is not just about financial knowledge. Thinking rich is about the scale of your vision. Small thinkers build small financial lives even when large incomes are available to them. Large thinkers build large financial lives from humble beginnings. Because the vision precedes the construction, you cannot build what you cannot first imagine, and you will not sustain the discipline required to build what you cannot clearly and passionately see. So vision work is financial work. Sitting with a piece of paper and writing out in specific, vivid, emotionally resonant detail what financial freedom looks like for you, that is not a motivational exercise. That is a practical, strategic investment in the mental clarity that will guide every subsequent financial decision. What does your life look like at financial independence? What are you doing? Who are you with? Where are you? What does a typical day feel like? What is no longer constraining you? What are you now free to pursue? Get specific. Get granular. Make it real enough that you can feel it. Because the feeling is what creates motivation. Information alone is not enough. Knowledge alone is not enough. You must feel the vision in order to sustain the behaviors that produce it. And revisit that vision regularly. Morning is a powerful time for vision work. Before the demands of the day begin, before the inbox opens, before the requests and responsibilities and distractions of the world descend, spend some time in the vision. Let it be real for a few minutes. Let it be vivid. Let it pull you. And then go into your day anchored by it, aligned with it, making decisions that are consistent with it. Do this daily. It requires perhaps 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes will influence every decision made in the following 16 hours. The return on that 5-minute investment is extraordinary. Thinking rich also means thinking abundantly about value creation. Wealth is created ultimately by solving problems, by providing value to other people at a scale and quality that they are willing to pay for. The wealthy are relentlessly focused on value creation, on developing skills, building products, providing services, creating systems that deliver value to increasing numbers of people. The more value you create, the more your income potential expands. And the more your income potential expands, the more capital you have available to deploy into the investments that build lasting wealth. So developing yourself professionally, expanding your skills, increasing your earning capacity, all of that is part of the wealth building picture. Acting broke governs what happens to the money. Thinking rich governs how much money you are capable of generating. And together, they produce the result. Invest in yourself. Invest in your skills, your knowledge, your capacity, your health, your mental clarity, your relationships. These investments are not on a spreadsheet, but they produce returns that show up eventually in every dimension of your life, including the financial one. The person who reads a book a month develops an edge over the person who reads nothing. The edge is small in any given month, but compounded over a decade, the edge becomes a chasm. The person who maintains their health and energy invests in their most fundamental asset, the capacity to show up fully and perform at the level that their ambitions require. Neglect that asset, and no financial strategy will fully compensate for the loss. You are the most important investment you will ever make. Your knowledge, your skills, your health, your character, your relationships. These are the assets that generate everything else. Financial assets are a product of human assets, and the wealthy understand this, which is why they invest consistently in themselves even as they invest consistently in financial instruments. The two are not separate strategies. They are one integrated approach to building a life of genuine prosperity. Now let me bring all of this together because I want to leave you with a complete picture, a clear sense of the philosophy in its entirety, and a clear sense of what is required to apply it. The philosophy is this: in every period of your financial life, regardless of your income level, you maintain a gap between what you earn and what you spend. That gap is sacred. That gap is the seed of every tree you will ever plant. You protect the gap, you grow the gap, you deploy the gap into assets that work on your behalf. You sustain this practice not for months but for years and decades, through seasons of abundance and seasons of difficulty, through cultural pressure and social comparison and moments of temptation and moments of doubt. You sustain it because you have a vision clear enough and compelling enough to make the sacrifice feel like investment. And over time, the investment compounds into outcomes that transform your financial reality, your options, your freedom, and your ability to contribute to the people and causes that matter most to you. Act broke. Not because you are broke, not because you need to perform frugality for anyone's approval, but because the discipline of living below your means is the single most reliable path to the kind of wealth that produces genuine freedom. Act broke as a strategy, act broke as a philosophy, act broke as a daily practice that honors the future self who will inherit every decision you make today. Think rich, not because your current circumstances warrant extravagance, not because the bank account already reflects your aspirations, but because the vision of what is possible must precede the construction of what becomes real. Think at the scale of the life you are building. Think with the clarity of someone who understands how wealth works and is committed to applying that understanding daily. Think with the abundance of someone who believes deeply that their best financial years are ahead of them, not behind them, and that every day of disciplined action brings those years closer. You are not trapped by your past. Your financial history does not determine your financial future. The habits that got you here are not the habits you are required to carry forward. The philosophy that governed previous decisions is not the philosophy that must govern future ones.